Out of seemingly nowhere, Rising Storm 2 Vietnam just got an update 7 years after its launch. And I enjoyed this title a lot back in 2017, and this out of the blue patch is a great excuse to jump back in and play one of the better Vietnam shooters around. So back when Rising Storm 2 launched, it was a reasonably popular indie title. Its game modes are very classic team-based objective play, and it wasn't really trying to be anything more than just a throwback to the golden years of the traditional military FPS games. And it did that very well, crafting a believable and accessible combat experience. I played it a bit at launch and came back for the various expansions over the years, especially when they injected a bit of that goofy Green Army Men DLC. That was kind of a fun way to mix things up. But since then, the devs have been pretty quiet, releasing the odd bug fix patch here and there. The game's last real update was over 3 years ago, but this week they launched a quality of life update that totally overhauls the game's VoIP system and addresses some issues with server stability and security. And while the update itself isn't like a major content drop or upgrading it to some new modern engine, it's still great to see this honestly fantastic game getting support all these years later. Jumping in for my first match, I got instant flashbacks of the days of Battlefield Bad Company 2 Vietnam. The lush foliage, the blinding sunlight, the colorful presentation, it's all here, albeit in more of an indie fashion. The draw distance for some stuff feels like it's a bit older tech, which frankly it is. I could see some grass cover on the ground expand and reveal itself as I got closer, but for an indie game from 2017, it's honestly impressive looking. The maps are mostly set in rural areas, so you get stuff like rice paddies, open fields, forests, and small clusters of buildings on otherwise open countryside maps. And frankly, I like games that have beautiful vistas to enjoy in the middle of a combat scene. It's just a nice contrast of beauty and action at the same time. They've even got those sunlight beams striking through the tree lines, which is very much the classic Unreal Engine 3 aesthetic of sort of photorealism, but also stylized. Now, it's been a little while since I played, and jumping back in, of course, I approach everything like it's Battlefield to some degree, and there was a bit of a learning curve as I had to stop sprinting everywhere and peaking my angles a little more methodically and just taking things at a slightly slower pace. But once I got in the groove, I was really impressed by how everything just sort of clicks. When I picked up the LMG class, for instance, I could easily see myself being unstoppable against players with semi-auto rifles and automatic assault rifles. Bipoded up in a machine gun nest, I could mow down advancing waves of enemies trying to work their way uphill. But even with the bipod, the machine gun had a ton of recoil and required short bursts of fire to stay on target. And when not bipoded, it was way too slow to ADS or hipfire, so running and gunning was pretty much off the table. Plus, there was plenty of snipers waiting to put me in my place if I ever slipped up, and I got taken out by plenty of them and semi-auto rifles. So despite the perceived advantage of having a belt-fed machine gun on the battlefield, it's nicely balanced so that you really have to be playing your role to be effective with it, and you can't just kind of force it into every single situation. Now, the game does limit a certain number of classes per team, so each team will only have, say, 2 snipers or a handful of anti-vehicle soldiers. This is kind of an old school design or something that's mostly seen in milsim shooters. It can be a little annoying that basically you have to load in quickly and pick your class as quickly as possible if you want one of the rarer or higher demanded classes, but the result is that you're not constantly dying to an entire team of snipers hidden in every bush around the map. And it also means that classes don't have to be perfectly balanced if there's the few rare ones that are just going to be less common. Of course, I did manage to pick up the sniper class for a round, and while it was fun, it was a little tricky to play since they benefit mostly from understanding the maps and angles well. They're kind of slow and less reactionary than, say, one of the mainstream shooters. And personally, I found a semi-auto rifle or even a fully automatic rifle set to semi-auto was good enough for most long-range situations. They're pinpoint accurate and the travel time feels very realistic, so even at like 200 yards away, I was taking down enemies from a lighthouse as they stormed the beach in 2 or 3 shots. I was actually really impressed by how intense the beach assault situation was. The attacking team gets a fleet of helicopters that drops them off, and they also have mounted machine guns, and they were just pouring in, dropping players off all around me. And even with the iron sights, I was managing to take a lot of them out, but eventually I ran out of ammo and had to flee my position as they overtook the nearby objective. Now, I really did enjoy coming back to this theater of war. It's been a while since a AAA studio has really gone deep on Vietnam, and it's usually indie games that kind of cover the conflict in more of a strategic firefight manner. The Vietnam War was a really strange era for military conflict. You had weapons from World War II being used as standard issue, while newer weapon platforms like the M16 were entering the battlefield. Plus, you had prop airplanes with machine guns fighting in the same conflicts that had jets with Seeking missiles. In one match, I found myself storming enemy trenches with a flamethrower, and it was every bit as insane as it sounds. The flamethrower in this game isn't your usual short-range weapon. It shoots fire over a pretty far distance and lights everything it touches up. So even if you can't see the enemy and they're hiding, say, in a building, you can spray that building and kill them with an AoE effect. It's pretty crazy. This game was also made before, I think, the more modern trend of minimalist UI became really popular, so there's actually a lot of good heads-up display info, which I gotta say I have no problem with because this is a hide-in-the-bush, camp-somewhere type game. I need some intel. It would be way too frustrating trying to do this with super minimalist HUD. The game pacing and everything would just get super slow. So it was kind of nice playing something that was like, oh yeah, we are a video game and here's all the info. Now, as much as I like Rising Storm 2, it is a niche game and it's always going to be. Right now, the player count has tripled from its usual average due to a patch and sale, but that doesn't mean that it's got a high player count overall. When I saw the update in the headlines, it got me pretty excited to revisit the game, even if this patch is fairly minor overall with just some bug fixes and VoIP updates. But I'm glad I jumped back in because this game is still incredibly solid. There's not a lot of other games that have attempted the Vietnam conflict recently, and this is probably one of the better ones on the market. Plus, it's 90% off right now, so that's probably why we're seeing a big surge of players. For $1.25, it's pretty easy for me to say you'll get your money's worth. It did also make me think about maybe it is time for an engine upgrade and a little bit of a visual overhaul. We've all seen what modern game engines can do, looking at Gray Zone Warfare and how they've rendered out jungles on the Unreal Engine 5. Thinking about those visuals updated for Rising Storm, I could easily see a new Vietnam game coming out that gets me excited. Even if they want to mix things up and get creative with the play modes, it could be a really cool way to bring back this IP. Unfortunately, I don't think there's going to be a lot of AAA money from making another FPS set in this era of conflict. I don't think this genre has ever been massively successful when compared to modern military, so it's probably always going to exist within the indie sphere from now on, but man, would it be cool to see this experience updated for UE5. I'd be curious to know what you guys think about this game in the comments, and also what you think about maybe a remaster. What would you want from something like that with game modes, co-op? Like, what would you imagine that game being? Let me know in the comments. And if you haven't seen gameplay from Gray Zone Warfare, check out this video here. The jungle rendering and environments is insane. It's next level. So check out that video and then think about what that would mean for a Vietnam game. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. This is Level Cap signing off.